Hello, and welcome to the Kingdom of Snacks. It's me, the Lumber King, King Snack himself, that's right. And today, we're going to be talking about Mercury Retrograde, because we just went into Mercury Retrograde. 226, all the way to 320. And let me tell you what, this is going to be a big one. Oh yeah, this is going to be a big one. And the reason it's going to be a big one, I'll toss a picture of what the planets look like right now. And kind of what's been going on in the planetary sphere. And now I know a lot of people don't consider astrology a science. I want it to be very clear those people are big dumb, okay? Genuinely. The study of consciousness and psychology is like maybe 100 years old, more or less tentatively, at least when we're getting into modern terms. Plus, our study of electromagnetism is also infantile. They didn't know that Jupiter had electromagnetism until 1973. Most of the planets exhibit some level of, electromagnetism. There's a whole mycelium layer. There's specific coordinating points with the moon. There's a lot of it, and it mostly has to do with math and physics and more or less the basic framework that first starts all those physics, because we're just in a gravity swell. There's like varying layers of this planet's bigger, that planet's bigger, this orbits that speed, this rotates that speed, and it's all a very divine, extreme calculator computer of sorts that even, if you want to get technical, our entire solar system is orbiting around something else. That's a whole new thing. That thing's orbiting around something else. That's a whole nother thing. It's just everything's in motion constantly. We take it for granted. But the reason this Mercury retrograde is so significant, or is going to be so significant, is A, the fascist MAGA states of Dink Donk the Trunkinator, that jackweave in the White House, is trying to go to war with Iran, because Israel wants to go to war with Iran. But that's a different thing. That's a whole mess that's going to happen. But anyhow, the bigger part of it, the more important part of it, is the conjunct that we just had and that we're currently in between Saturn and Neptune in 0 degrees Aries. And Aries is, of course, the first sign, meaning that it's kind of starting over. And the fact that a planet like Saturn that orbits the sun every 28 to 30 years, give or take, and the planet Neptune, which orbits the sun every 165-ish years, because it's about 2 times that of Uranus. First and foremost, that conjunct doesn't happen very often, just in general, let alone at such a sensitive degree that is 0%, 0 degrees Aries, which is like the true start of it. Especially when you factor in Sir Isaac Newton predicting that the Day of Judgment will be no earlier than 2060, and seeing that Pluto re-enters Aries in 2066. We're on a divine course, in case you didn't know. Science has never disproven this, and in fact, the Epstein pedophile list and the Rothschilds, those people who have been completely in control of American education and kind of the scientific front, there are like Nobel Peace Prize and Nobel Prize awarders and nominators on the Epstein list who are resigning because of being outed on the Epstein list. You know which monarch isn't on the Epstein list? King Snack. He's not on the Epstein list, thank God. Finally, a king we can trust. But here's the thing about Mercury retrograde, because I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about it with his little buddy that I can't super remember their name. And the one thing that really just bothers me whenever I hear Neil deGrasse Tyson, or really any man, talk about Mercury retrograde, is it always typically starts out with some sexist joke about a woman believing in it And it's like, dude, this was a male-dominated field for centuries. And like, quite frankly, if you want to lump it in with magic, you know, all of the smartest people who discovered all of our math, quantum physics, more or less, everything, all heavily believed and were studying magic. That was like the whole point of it. You know, there's a significant overlap between religion and magic, if you really want to get into it. And magic's just a tool that God, Allah, has given to us, I think. Now, you know, there's different classifications of magic. You know, sometimes like sorcery's kind of whack, but that's super intention wise, and like, you know, going through making sure that the planets are properly aligned, and then building a talisman and images, and then burying at certain places. And yeah, if you want to learn more about burying talismans places, go read the Pikatrix. We got free will. This is a free world, technically. You know, some people in power would like to disagree with that, but you know, it's a free world. It's a free world. Trump is also saying that he's gonna release the alien files to distract from the war and the pedophiles that he's actively in and trying to cover up. However, he's also getting pushback by like major science and robotics and whatever firms saying that they can't release the information because it undermines evangelical Christianity. And it's like, no doy, right? No doy. Because like these aliens that exist, like more or less, they're just like the angels, right? Like Revelations, it talks to the 7 lampstands, right? With the Son of Man walking between them. You know, that's directly parallel to the book of Enoch, where it talks of the 7 who are more or less just in trouble for a long period of time. Anyway, Mercury retrograde. Why is it a thing? How does it work? What does it do? Mercury retrograde is a period of time that you see destabilization in career, monetary efforts, travel, transportation. Things just kind of get tossed into disarray a little bit. Power structures start to fall, you know, things get released. It happens. But a lot of people say, you know, what does Mercury have to do with us? You know, why does Mercury care about us? Well, you know, it goes back down to Descartesian and Leibnizian mathematics, quite frankly, and a rationalistic worldview. You know, Rene Descartes said that what seems to make the most sense for why everything orbits properly is because there's these random, more or less invisible vortexes spinning in the nothingness of space. I mean, he thought it was liquid, but it's nothingness more than anything. But it's also like a weird level of nothingness. Like a really weird level of nothingness, because there's definitely like electromagnetism out there. What else would you call dork matter? And then Leibniz is big on the monad with his monadology, these infinitesimally small indivisible points that just exist. God put them everywhere to keep everything in line. And then you look at something like the more or less invisible point that is the barycenter between Jupiter and the Sun, which exists outside of the Sun. So tentatively speaking, our entire solar system is more or less orbiting around that infinitesimally small indivisible point that has so much rotational power that everything orbits around it. You know, you can say it's because of the Sun, which it is, but it's just as much in part Jupiter. You know, it's kind of like a little handshake almost, where they're like pulling and tugging at each other into that negative and imaginary space, which is why imaginary numbers and cube functions are so prominent in astrophysics, I believe. But anyhow, you got a point like that, right? About 1.07 solar radii outside the Sun's center. So it's in the vacuum of space. And you've got Mercury just kind of like going around it. It's the closest planet to it, and Mercury has a very, very circular orbit. It's rotational speed is, or days, is like 167 days to rotate on its axis or something like that, and it's 88 days around the sun. You know, super zippy, super fast. But more or less, it kind of like, I'm pretty sure Mercury just like condenses all that like first step electromagnetism between itself and the sun, kind of just like coalescing around that point. You know, I don't think science has ever looked into that. But anyhow, when you get, you know, start to rationalize with the idea that these barycenters are very much so things that exist and have power and control, you know, everyone's got a center. Everyone's got that indivisible point inside of them. I think that's like the Christ, more or less, or Allah, God. Is that like that point, that point that connects everybody and everything to the, you know, the microcosm to the macrocosm. But see, when Mercury goes retrograde, what it actually does is it means that it starts to go on the complete opposite side of the sun as the Earth. And so with Mercury being the barycenter of the sun closest to its center, if at all those things had gravitational pull, you know, within the center of that gigantic nuclear fission ball that just exists in space, you know, the first direction that it gets pulled is away from the Earth before it eventually gets returned kind of back to that direction. But, you know, then you've got Venus to have its tug, you got the Earth to have its tug, Mars, and then at that point, well, actually, no, it goes Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, and then a bit further out is Neptune, and then Uranus, and then Saturn, and then Jupiter. You know, they swatch and reverse each other. But the reason that I wanted to say why this Mercury retrograde is so important is because of how it ends. You know, how Mercury retrograde ends this Mercury retrograde cycle. Not like I know exactly what's going to go on, but what I do know is that the day that it ends is pretty on par and exact with the sun going into Aries as part of the vernal equinox, you know, when everything starts waking up. And the sun will be at that point where more or less Saturn and Neptune went conjunct at the point that they went completely conjunct. And it's kind of like just one of those weird little levels of divine timing that just happens. And it almost, to me, feels like with all these correlating points with Aries, it almost feels like a reset. Like an astronomical reset for our solar system. You know, everything's going to get freaking whack going forward. But yeah, I'll show the two side by side so you can see, you know, how they are going to interact with each other. But that's going to do it, you know. It's kind of like something about like astrology and like astronomy and how it functions and how it operates. If you're part of an Abrahamic religion that holds any value to the Torah at all, it literally mentions God establishing astrology in like Genesis chapter 1 verse 14, when it mentions him establishing lines within the firmament that separate the waters from within from the waters from outside. And he did this in order to separate, you know, to designate signs, seasons, and a few other things, days, weeks, years. But flat out, anytime you see signs and seasons, that's like astrology, right? Like that's like why we call like synchronicities and stuff that we see signs and symbols and signals, is because it starts with those first signs and signals. Anyway, things are getting crazy. I'm here though. And if you don't want to be part of the American MAGA fascist Reich anymore, you're tired of that loser nerd dweeb and his little crony buddies who are all freaking Nazis, feel free to join the Kingdom of Snacks. Just like, you know, just join. I don't know. I'm not gonna tax you. Yeah, I'll give you your freedom of speech back and your Second Amendment, you know. You can do whatever you want. I'm just kind of tired of these blowhards blowing everybody. They just, they have their interest groups and they just, you know, bend over and lube up for them. Because this entire world is ran on a hollow, fragile economic wasteland that just really profits and benefits the worst people imaginable. You know, people who literally eat children. Like, that's something we're learning, is that, like, that's something that actually happens. And it's like, there's more people who do that than we realize. And, like, these people need to be dealt with, you know. It's like, I believe, yeah, oh man. Those people need to go. They just need to be wiped, removed from existence entirely. They're pretty despicable and disgusting. But I'm tired. Have a fun Mercury retrograde.